right, so Kevin, here we are in the Readathon.
Another Readathon.
We watched 2020 on Friday night,
Yeah.
which was an overview of the Karen Read case, trial, and of course, their exclusive series of Karen Read interviews, which I think were done primarily like before the trial and as the trial was beginning, right?
Yeah, I'll say some of it, yeah.
Yeah, because it was because they were basically like, then the trial began. So it was basically like as the trial was beginning and they had her in her hotel room.
Right.
Kind of before the trial started. So we watched that together over the weekend, the 2020 with Karen Read.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious to know, what were your general impressions of the 2020 episode featuring Karen Read and the Karen Read case?
Yeah, I mean, I think, went right sort of down the middle. Again, I mean, Karen Read is a good get, but that's about it as far as like the major players or they've got cousins and friends of the O'Keefes. Nobody that we would say represents the Alberts or the McCabe's besides their own testimony played back.
They didn't really show much of that, though. No,
they didn't show much of that. No, I mean, I think it was, a nice biography of John O'Keefe and his life. I learned, a little more about his family. They, as far as, the bigger details of the case, it didn't go as deep as a lot of people who have been following the case know. I mean, one of the things I will say, it does give me some more thought about one piece of evidence, which is the taillight, which is, I guess, apparently we see in the Ring camera video the morning after John dies, where Karen goes to her car. And she and her father notice the taillight at that point is broken, right? Not like a month later. And so they also found at the scene, according to 2020, all of the pieces of the taillight.
Incorrect.
That's not what they said in 2020?
That is what they said in 2020, but that's inaccurate.
Okay. Well, then I'm just going to tell you by what I saw there. That made me think, okay, all the pieces are there. Okay.
Right.
And that the fact that Karen noticed then that the taillight was broken is important. Now, we also know the idea that it's very possible from the way she backed up, she struck a car, that whole thing there, that was interesting. But, I don't think that's the big news that's coming out of this weekend.
Okay,
in the case.
There was one honest...
I don't know, does that answer your question? That was my takeaway.
No, absolutely. Yeah. There was one cop who testified at the Karen Read trial, and I have to look up his name. And he was there at her parents' house in Dighton, okay? And he testified to the condition of her taillight at the Karen Read case. He said that her taillight was not damaged to the extent that it was essentially... when we saw photos of it.
And at some point, did you make any observations of the right rear part of that Lexus SUV?
I did.
And what, if anything, did you observe about that area of the vehicle?
I saw that there was some damage to the right rear taillight. To my best ability and recollection, that taillight was not completely damaged. It was cracked, and a piece was missing, but not completely damaged.
What Karen Read was alluding to when she talked about her taillight being damaged, that she noticed, was that her taillight was cracked. Her taillight did not look the way it looked in the photos that we saw in the 2020 interview, and the way it looked in the photos that the jury saw. Did not look that way the morning that John O'Keefe was found. It did not. Because there's actually photos of her driving that morning that you can actually see. There's actually video of her driving where you can see an intact red taillight with a chunk missing of it. The pieces that were found at the scene, they were not all found that morning. And there were 3 pieces found there. And then mysteriously during the trial, there were 5 pieces shown to the jury. But they were not logged into evidence from the scene.
Okay.
That's just true.
Okay.
And I was very surprised to hear on the 2020 interview that all the pieces of the taillight were found at the scene, because they weren't. They weren't. There were pieces found that morning. There were pieces found later by Ken Berkowitz. And then there were pieces that were just logged into evidence later in a bag that just were never accounted for from the scene. So do you remember when, and this is actually in the Turtleboy interview there's a new interview that he has with a new juror, which we'll talk about in a minute, where they were looking for the CERT report, the initial search team report. They were actually trying to account for that. Like, where did these taillight pieces come from? Because they didn't understand that. There was no initial search report from that CERT team. There wasn't one. There was no written report from that search team saying where these taillight pieces came from. Those taillight pieces were not found on that lawn that morning. They were sort of found late days in the preceding days, but it was never a complete taillight housing found from that scene ever. And I was very, very surprised to see that on that 2020 thing. It wasn't accurate.
Should I not have brought that fact up?
No, it's fine.
All right.
No, that
was my takeaway. Was that I was like, oh, okay, that's a little thought-provoking.
That was interesting. And the other thing that was interesting to me that was on the 2020 piece, that if I didn't know anything about the case, I mean, I would watch that not knowing anything about the case and think, oh, she probably did it. Mm-hmm. I probably would watch that piece from that case and go back to the way that I felt before I knew anything about this trial, which was that she probably hit him and just doesn't know that she hit him, which is how I felt at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing that they did, which was inaccurate, which was they said there's talk of a federal investigation.
As if there were no federal investigation.
Yes.
Yeah.
They said there's talk of a federal investigation. That was a glaring inaccuracy and a glaring omission in that piece, in my opinion.
Yeah, do you think that ABC was unable to verify independently the existence of a federal grand jury?
It exists. There have been hearings about it in open court. I mean, there was a pretrial hearing about the federal grand jury. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we know it exists. Like, there was evidence.
Okay, I don't know why ABC phrased it that way. That doesn't seem to be like really salient point to me, other than the fact that if you're asking why I think they phrased it that way, is probably because they couldn't get someone from the FBI to verify to their fact checker that is there.
Okay.
And so that was the way they couched it.
Do you think that if Judge Beverly Cannoni in open court acknowledges the existence of a federal grand jury and says, I'm going to take all of these files and put them under seal, like, wouldn't that be enough for ABC to say, like...
Apparently not.
So do you think, though, that is it typical? I mean, in my mind, it's very typical of these hour-long news stories to do a glossy job and not like go super deep. I find that most people are very unsatisfied when they watch these hour-long news stories. This is actually exactly what I was expecting.
Yeah. I
mean, I wasn't expecting more than this, frankly. Were you?
No, because we know way more than, I mean, it's like when Investigation Discovery tries to do like their hour-long feature on the Adnan Syed case. Like, they're just not going to get we just know way more detail than they are providing. And
Absolutely.
So it's for somebody who has not been following the case at all.
Right.
So people are like, why is Rebecca Lavoie and other people doing podcasts about this case? I wonder what it is about this case. It's for them.
Right.
It's for the regular 2020 person who wants to kind of get upset. To that extent, it did bring up, a couple of different things. It's not going into all of the stuff about, they didn't mention Colin Albert and, like the things on his hands. Like there's like all sorts of details that like they could have gone into. All sorts of details about the defense's theory of the case. They presented some interesting things, about the prosecution's side of the case. But, again, they're just trying to play it down the middle here.
What do you think of the fact that Karen Read's lawyers would be so confident in allowing her to do this?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it speaks volumes about like how strongly they believe her story. And I mean, she could also 100% be telling the truth and still say something damaging, right? A slip of the tongue, anything like that. If you believe that, if you 100% believe the McAlberts in their innocence, like you would have to say there were times though that they said stuff that like looked sketchy, maybe not by design either. So yeah, you could definitely like slip up. The idea that we're going to let her do it, I mean, that just shows a lot of confidence in their client.
Yeah. And we know that everybody in this case is lawyered up, like every single person. Mm-hmm. And she was the only voice represented. I mean, I just will say the people that represented the, O'Keefe family, you know, they were very empathetic, obviously. There was also some very tangential people who were not really closely involved. What struck me, there were no fellow, you know, Boston police officers represented in the case. There were no one from the prosecution was involved in this at all. And you very often you do see like a prosecutorial voice in these things.
Well, let me just push back slightly and do you notice that you hear the prosecution a lot after the case has been adjudicated?
Sure.
And this is already a problematic case for them.
Right.
So I'm sure the word came down from the district attorney that no one is to talk to the press about this.
Right.
Certainly not 2020 sit down for an interview here. So that I'm 0% surprised that's what they had to work with.
Right. We have no Alberts, no McCabe's. Yeah. Nobody's sort of defending themselves there. Okay, so one thing that I want to move on to, because I do think that, though, that when I look at the court of public opinion here, people who know nothing about it say, she seems guilty, she looks guilty. That doesn't surprise me.
Her demeanor is not great.
Her demeanor is what it is.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about her demeanor. It just is what it is.
She has a very bad poker face. Right?
Yeah.
Right? And so she seems nice, but does sometimes she come off like looking like she's giving people the stink eye or something?
I would.
Yeah, I mean, the jurors have said that. Everyone, you know, I'm not saying, I'm just telling you like it is. This is what people say, that sometimes she comes off looking smug or whatever. Yeah. She may not be smug, but that is the impression that she sometimes gives, and that is some people are basing their opinion on her guilt based on her demeanor.
Absolutely.
Which is not uncommon, and certainly not uncommon for women, so there's that.
Absolutely. I would say, though, if I were sitting right next to those people and I had small wins or small losses in court, I probably would not be able to keep a poker face either. So moving on to Aidan Carney's latest interview with a juror.
Another Turtleboy interview with this is actually a new juror. This is not one of the ones that have come forward before. Yes.
Correct. And you read this, correct?
I did.
This is an interesting one because this was more of a back and forth than a series of written questions. And this juror, I'm not going to just go ahead and do all the beat by beats. We can post a link to it in the show notes here. One of the things I found most interesting about this, and then you can tell me if you have any takeaways that you want to highlight, is that this juror talks about two real big takeaways. One is that there were 3 holdout jurors who were never, ever, ever, ever going to be anything but not guilty in this case.
But not guilty? Okay,
yes.
I thought I read it the other way, but...
No.
Well, of course, yeah.
There were 3 jurors who were clearly never going to move, and they were going to be not guilty. They were holdouts, and it was very clear that were not for those jurors that the jury maybe would not have been hung. That was one thing.
Yeah.
Second was that the jury foreman seems to have been a very, very powerful voice on the jury. Told the other jurors that he was the only person who could guide any questions asked to Judge Cannoni, and that jurors did want to ask the question about whether or not they could find out about the verdicts, whether or not they could ask about acquittal on the 2 other charges.
I wonder how true that is in Massachusetts.
I don't know, but that the
other 11 are prohibited from.
Right, but that foreman said no. I'm the only one who can ask questions. That foreman said no. We have to be hung on all 3. And we cannot, that foreman basically
unanimous
said no.
on all 3,
Correct.
whichever direction.
Correct, which isn't true, but that's what that foreman said.
Yeah, the foreman should have, they should have insisted we need to get clarification on that.
Right. The other thing that they said was...
Which would have been a big signal, right? That would have been like super palace intrigue when that comes forward. Like, do we have to be... Yeah, anyway.
Right, and that the juror thought that the least reliable witnesses were Trooper Paul and Lucky Loughran?
Yeah. Lucky?
Which was interesting.
Didn't Lucky, the plow driver, wasn't there part of it, there was an accident that was involved that night that
hitting the basketball.
Hitting the basketball, so they thought that damaged his credibility.
Yeah. What else did you take away from this interview?
Well, I think the big thing was that this was in his mind, or her mind, I don't know what. Their mind, yeah. That in this juror's mind, and I don't know to the extent that the other 11 felt this way, this juror believed, based on what the medical examiner said, that John O'Keefe died because of a blow to the head, or injury to the head, and hypothermia.
Yes.
And that they believe that Karen Read did not strike John O'Keefe with the car, so those 2 factors of death are not attributed to her.
Right.
She didn't leave him out in the cold, and
it was like he jumped back when she was.
Now
back.
that was the thing.
Yeah.
They believe that what happened was that the reason that that John O'Keefe jumped back. This is a theory that nobody posed.
Yeah.
That, that Karen Read was coming hot at him and that he tried to get out of the way.
150 feet from the truck.
And that she never made contact, which is why, I don't know, injuries are such, and that he got these injuries from falling. It's interesting. It's almost a bit of a middle ground, but it's like, okay, that's rather an interesting thing to take away, to something to chew on for both sides.
Yeah, which is interesting because there's nothing on the ground that he could have hit his head on. And also, he's so far away from where she was parked. It's just strange.
Yeah. The other thing that, that they put a lot of, apparently one of the jurors was an engineer.
That was the foreman.
The foreman was the engineer.
Yes.
All right. So when it came to the engineering evidence, that juror was very influential over the other jurors about explaining exactly what this stuff means and what they can take away. And it seems like, according to this interview, that for this juror, again, here's a recurring theme. They believe the Arca. How did we say the Arca guys? But they had trouble discerning how much weight and credibility to give because they didn't know where they came from.
They thought they were hired by her insurance company or Turtleboy.
Or Turtleboy, which is interesting.
Weird.
Which is weird. They were aware of Turtleboy.
Yeah.
During or at least he was. That's interesting. But that if they and asked, the response was if they had known that Arca was hired by the FBI or the Department of Justice, that they would have cemented in their mind that these were credible, and then they need to put a lot of weight on what their findings were.
Can I read that quote?
So again, the whole thing just about they had questions, not knowing that some of this information was the third party was the FBI, and then that added so much credibility to that whole tranche of information. Seemed to ultimately work against the defense.
Let me read you what the juror said.
Sure.
Quote, knowing the Arca guys were hired by the FBI, that would have changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If it was told to us they were part of a separate investigation, that's all they needed to say without tainting our information. But I think even the jurors would have looked at that differently. One of the major pivotal points was the engineer in the group said the Arca guys did not give us any of their data. They presented the information but did not give us any of the parameters they set up as far as the engineering controls and any of that specific data. The engineer, based on his experiences, said these were not credible witnesses. The majority of us probably would have changed our vote if we knew that information. That engineer dude sounds like a little bit of a jury room bully, to be honest with you. So yeah, that was an interesting thing. This juror also said that John may have gone in the house, basically, and as to whether or not the jury foreman was bullying, he said that he was given the charge of being a foreman, and therefore we believed he was the leader and knew what he was talking about. So basically, yeah, it sounds like this was a very influential foreman, and that was a very, very powerful, persuasive person in the case. Yeah. Yeah,
and another sort of takeaway, again, we're talking about sort of what was the communication failure right before the mistrial where we're saying that somehow the jury note or what was communicated from the jury to the judge did not reflect the idea that they were only hung up on one of the three charges, right? That they would be able to come to agreement on two, and that sort of did not get communicated at all. And we have very long been sort of throwing this all into the lap of Judge Cannoni for not inquiring about that, right? But it also seems like the foreman, I don't want to say withheld that, but specifically chose not to frame it that way for reasons that he believed that he couldn't do that, or he couldn't put it out there, and did not inquire further about it. That it was his understanding, and I don't want to say his understanding alone, but his understanding, and that he would not try to do anything to fact check this, that he could not, that they had to be unanimous on all things. So basically, because we're not unanimous on this, hey, we're not unanimous. We're hopelessly deadlocked. Mm-hmm. And that's where that came from. So some of it lies with that. But apparently there is a group text among the jurors, and that some are in there, and that this particular juror hasn't jumped in, but they sort of, amongst themselves feel like they need to communicate something about this.
Yeah. I will just say, for the record again, that the scientific evidence shows that Karen Read could not have hit John O'Keefe with her car. And that is where it ends to me. His injuries show it. The ARCA guys show it. Her Wi-Fi data shows it. His Apple Watch data shows it. That's where the case begins and ends for me. I began this entire thing with a lot of skepticism, believing that, she may have been overcharged. There's a good chance she may have hit him. There's obviously some sort of weird conspiracy police shit going on, but she may very well have done something. I am still very firmly with this evidence on the side of there's just no fucking way she did. And yeah, I'm frustrated by the 2020 thing, but I also feel like that's just true crime media. So, it is what it is. So Kevin, where are you at right now with Karen Read after seeing 2020 and after reading this juror interview?
Well, like I said, I thought a little more about the taillight information. I mean, if you're going to refute what,
It wasn't what was in the trial is what I'm going to say. What they said was not what was in the trial. That surprised me. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying that if I were a juror and I heard that information, I would be chewing on that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what we saw on TV...
It's not saying that I'm going to change my vote, but it does make me start to want, if I were on the jury, trying one of the McAlberts and that defense pointed out, well, if they're going to continue to point at Karen Read, so they found all that information there, I'd be start going, okay, well, maybe there's some reasonable doubt, that way.
Yeah.
It's very tantalizing, especially when they show photographs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens, I guess, right?
That doesn't mean that, it couldn't have been planted.
That's true.
They've taken all the pieces of
which I believe it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. Well, we will come back with another readathon when it is time to, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for joining me, Kevin.
Sure.
Partners in Crime Media.